When you started college, did you think you knew what you wanted to do afterwards?
Yeah, I thought I wanted to be a child psychologist.
And that's why you majored in psychology?
Correct. And
And
I'm sorry.
no, and I was going to ask you about the progression of your degrees, because you have a master's in counseling, but a PhD, and a PhD in political science. What was that? What was the progression of that?
I always knew I wanted to be in a helping field, and but with psychology, I just realized I didn't want to be a child psychologist. I grew to the point that I wanted to, run an agency. And actually, one of my pie in the sky, I had two pie in the sky jobs, and one was to work for a president or with a president I believed in. But I thought maybe running HHS or HUD or something like that. I never, ever, ever dreamed that I would run for office. Never. And so I did kind of get one of my pie in the sky jobs, actually, when I ran and won for Congress. But I did counseling. And then also, I always knew I wanted my PhD, and it was just, was I going to get it in sociology or political science? And I was always interested in politics. My family always talked about politics and government around the table and that kind of thing. So I liked the courses that were offered. So I pursued political science.
What was your first job out of college?
Out of college, I worked at a daycare. And actually, I started in college and continued out of college. That was one of the reasons I didn't want to be a child psychologist.
Makes sense. That makes sense. So you said that your interest in politics sort of started around the dinner table. What was your first political experience?
Actually, it was when the mayor of New York at the time, I think it was John Lindsay, when he came through the neighborhood and we got a chance to see him. And then I think Robert Kennedy might have also, but those are my first memories.
Did you work for Robert Kennedy?
No, I didn't work. No, it was just as a Jane Q. Public, seeing them and just discussing things with my family. But no, I didn't work for them. That was just my first real experiences when I came to work for the Village of Matheson in 1992. That was my first experience working in government and working for, the mayor and the other trustees of the village.
Would you say that there was a defining moment or a significant decision that you have made in your political life, something where you could say this is where things really changed?
What, the reason I wanted to run, or just in general?
Just some point in your career where you say that was really where I made an important decision, or think I took a different road that led me to where I am now.
Well, definitely, I worked for Bradley University, and my first husband and I divorced. So I could have gone back home, but I didn't, because I was, by that time, some time had passed, but by that time I was with my second husband and deciding, to come to the Chicagoland area instead of going back to New York. I mean, that was a major decision because, of course, one thing, I work for the village, and from my work in the village, that's why 5 gentlemen asked me to consider running for state rep. And if I was in New York, this probably would not have happened.
Yeah. What year was it that you ran for state rep?
I started in 2001, won the primary March 2002, and sworn in January 2003. And
you served in that capacity how long?
4 years. I actually gave up my seat to become Alexi Janulius's chief of staff. And
what made you decide to do that?
Believe me, it was another leap of faith in my life. When he asked me, I cried every day for 3 weeks because I love my job as state rep. I called my campaign manager every day for 3 weeks and said, are you ready for your therapy session? It was such a hard decision. And the funny part is his mom called me from Greece. And so she got me to go work for him. So I always tell him his mother closed the deal.
What was really the reason that you took that offer?
I thought I could make a difference on a larger level. My state rep district was my state rep district, 108,000 people. And this was a statewide office. And I thought that, I could make a difference statewide, frankly. And I know that we did with things we did around financial literacy. And, we worked with women a lot and low interest loans. We had the biggest, farm loan program and things like that. So I know we touched individuals and families and made a difference. And that's the bottom line for me.
How did he find you? How did he even know to ask you to work with him?
Well, when he announced that he was going to run, 2 people that I'm close with asked me to come to his announcement. And I did, and I like what he had to say. So I helped him in his campaign. But then I just went back to, I had my own campaign. I won for state rep for the 3rd time. No Democrat ran against me or Republican. So I said to myself, oh, I finally made it. Nobody's even running against me. And then, then he calls and asks me to give that up.
Big decision. If you could say, if I'd known then what I know now when you were in your 20s, what would your answer be? Or what would you tell your 20-something self?
Wow. Don't be afraid to take chances and, explore opportunities, which, that's what I have done, after that point. But I wish I would have done it earlier. Even I think about this when I was in college. I wish I would have done study abroads and things like that, but I didn't.
Have you had to struggle with work-life balance issues, being a mother and a public official and all of that?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
What were your coping techniques?
Well, I first have to speak with my scheduler and say, please don't schedule, because you can be scheduled, every minute of every hour. And I struggle with it to this day. And, but I just have to slow myself down and, take a break, whether it's my husband teases me because I watch a Hallmark movie that calms me down. And it's just because I can just watch it and not have to think about, that much. It always ends with, a kiss. So that's a good thing and it ends positively. Or, I'll get a massage or, just something for me. But it is difficult to have a great balance. And also part of it's my fault because I don't say no enough.
Yeah. Why did you want to be the Democratic Party chair?
I thought about it when I became the state central committee person, but of course I never thought Madigan was leaving, anytime soon. But this Congress, I was joined by Mary Miller from downstate, someone who praises Nazis and, very, disruptive in Congress. And I just said, this is crazy that someone like that can come to Congress, that we need to do something different in Illinois. We need to stop saying we're such a blue state, which we are, but we're blurple and we have red areas too. And we need to make sure that we're building a stronger Democratic Party, that we're going to the red areas and pulling out the Democrats, the independents, and depending on who's running, the moderate Republicans. And we need to make sure we're building the bench and reaching out to all kind of communities. And I just didn't feel like we were doing that. And I'm known in my area as a unifier, a collaborator. So I thought I had good skills to not only pull us together and have everyone feel appreciated and valued, but to build an even stronger party.
Do you think that there are specific challenges that you'll face as you follow a white male that's been in that seat for 40 years?
It's already happened. There, I get questioned, the expectations of me that I don't feel like people had of him, as a Black female. I know people are expecting a more diverse Democratic Party of Illinois, meaning even the staff we hire, the vendors and consultants that we deal with. Oh yes, there's already different expectations.
Yeah. And you've got so many responsibilities in Congress. How are you going to balance that with this big responsibility?
Well, with all the successes that I've had, I never take all the credit myself. I have been very, very fortunate to have excellent staff around me. And I have excellent staff as a member of Congress that helped me greatly. And I plan on the same thing for the Democratic Party of Illinois. I also plan for the party to be more transparent and inclusive. So the state central committee people that are there now, they will have more responsibility and be more involved than we were under Mike Madigan.
Where would you want to be in 5 years?
Either I will still be in Congress or I will be retired, hopefully on a beach somewhere.
How do you think we're going to find a path to racial and gender equity in this country?
Laws can't change hearts. I feel like stories change hearts and experiences, but I do feel like we need to make sure the right laws and programs even are in place, like what the president has talked about. We need to look at, access to capital and opportunity. We need to look at healthcare disparities. We need to look at how people are educated, where people live. And we talk about the social determinants of health, but I like to say we need to look at the social determinants of life and how unequal they are right now. And I do feel like because of COVID really put a light on healthcare disparities, even though we knew, the numbers might be shocking, but if you ask like the Congressional Black Caucus, they'll tell you they're not surprising because, this inequity has gone on forever. So, and then couple that with George Floyd and all the other names, I just feel like, this is a moment now, but we need to make sure it's a movement that people seem to have a higher level, some people, of consciousness, and they get it now that we have to do things differently. And I feel like, there's enough people in the right mindset, but we still have to experience each other, be exposed to each other. And we have to, as one of my friends says, love is a verb. Don't tell me you're sorry about what happened. Show me that you're sorry. Hire me, contract with me, promote me, have me on your board. Let me make it to your C-suite, those kind of things. We need action.
So do you think this is a responsibility of the federal government, or do you think it's something that only the private sector can deliver? How do you see us getting there?
This sounds really corny, but I think it's everyone's responsibility. I think that, yes, it's the federal government, let us do everything we can to create an environment where this can happen. I think corporations need to do more. We just did, my staff just did something looking at the energy industry, and there is so little diversity, just like in the tech industry. It's ridiculous, so there's, so corporations need to be responsible, but also I think that, when it comes to education and what we learn and what we appreciate about each other down to, individual households, I think that makes a difference too. I just think if people have been exposed and have positive experiences, that helps. And that helps in their decisions of who they hire and, who they contract with, who they don't mind moving next door to them, or people staying and not moving.
Do you think the struggle for gender equity is the same or as powerful as for racial equity?
Well, I'm a Black woman, so I have the double thing. I think that I know people can see gender, but I think if you measure things, race is always about race. I think that, yes, the struggle with race is even worse. If you look at LGBTQ community, I think if you're Black and LGBTQ, that's worse. If you're a woman and the pay gap, it's bad, but it's worse if you're a Black woman. If you look at maternal mortality, it's the United States does not do a good job, but it's worse if you're a Black woman. So yes, I think race, is makes it harder. Yeah.
Okay. If you could have 5 minutes alone with President Biden in the Oval Office, what message would you give him?
Oh, woo, 5 minutes alone. Wow. That's a really good question. I mean, when you said that, what came to my mind immediately was please, 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 let's do something about gun violence. And that was something I ran on 8 years ago. And it's still such a big problem, but doing something about gun violence, I feel that will help you do something about, it's not just the legislation and the background checks and trafficking and all that, but it's about police community relations. It's about investing in communities, giving people hope and opportunities. So doing something about gun violence means doing something about those things also.
How did you become so passionate about the gun violence issue? I know you were responsible for a report in Congress many years ago. Is it 8 already or 7? How did that become such an important issue for you?
The first piece of legislation I passed as a state rep was dealing with straw purchases. It was Don Harmon and Barack Obama and myself. So, I mean, I don't know, because I come from a police family in New York. We have generations of policemen. I had 3 uncles. My cousin is NYPD now, and then my nephews are CPD in Chicago. One of my stepdaughters works for, she's a 911 operator, and the other one works for the FBI. So I don't know, it's continued. And so I'm sure that has something to do with it, but just the idea of so many young people, anybody, but so many young people losing their lives to gun violence is so senseless. And then the amount of suicides.
Yeah. So you're involved in a lot of committees and initiatives and caucuses in Congress. What are the most important issues to you, if you could rank them now?
Sure. Well, I'm the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust. So I would say, that's number one, not just because of COVID, but because of the, healthcare inequities or disparities. Of the top 10 diseases that Americans die from, African Americans are number 1 in 8 out of the 10. So I would say that gun violence and then economic development, because I feel like nothing stops a bullet like an opportunity. And that opportunity could be a job or learning a new skill or education, or it could be a mentee, or mentor that gives you an opportunity. But I would say that, and then shockingly to me, I've been very involved in tech and artificial intelligence. Not that I ever would have thunk it, but my staff kind of drugged me into it. So, but because I'm so involved in healthcare, I'm doing a lot of work around telehealth, and that became so prominent, during COVID. And then my former colleague, state rep, Will, he left. He's Republican. We worked, in a bipartisan way around tech, but also around artificial intelligence.
So with whom do you work the closest in Congress now, would you say?
Um, I don't know if there's just one person. I'm on Energy and Commerce. I work very closely with Yvette Clark. She's a congresswoman from New York. I work with Lucy McBath because she does a lot of work around gun violence. I work very close with Barbara Lee, Catherine Clark, again, gun violence, and David Cicilline. I've kind of worked with a lot of different people, and I try to work in a bipartisan way as much as possible.
So with your background and your involvement with the police department that you were mentioning in your family and so on, what do you think is the best solution to the current or some of the current attitudes about police, excessive force, the need for more mental health services? You know, are we asking too much of our police and not giving them enough resources, or you know, where did we go wrong in this formula, in this equation?
Well, I don't think it's just one thing. I do think we ask too much of the police, and we expect them to be, they're not counselors, they're not, you know, parents. The same thing with teachers. We ask a lot, you know, of teachers. I think it has to do with some who's becoming a police officer. Everybody doesn't have the acumen to become a police officer. What some of my chiefs have said, I have about, you know, besides Chicago, about 40 towns, and some have said that they can't get enough people of color to even apply to be police officers, and they're getting people that have not been around any diversity at all, which is not good. And I think so it has to do with that. I also think it has to do with the training. Something needs to be different, you know, and also police see ugly stuff. So I think that they should have to go to counseling, you know, a certain amount of times, you know, a year, just to check in, and maybe that's the counselor in me. But I do think that we need to check on their health care more. And but I definitely think we have to keep with training, not just in the beginning, but there's a different way we have to do things, because like what happened to de-escalating the situation. And also it seems like, and you know, it's a tough job that I don't know if it seems like police are more afraid, you know, but a lot of police have lost their lives or being shot also. But I think, you know, those things that, you know, the folks that are police, and when you hear the stories about how many times, you know, they've been written up, like, why are we keeping someone so long? Now I know some things could be people just call in and they really didn't do anything wrong. I understand that balance also, but it just seems like, you know, we let things go. And then if you think about what happened in Chicago with Burge and all of that, you know, the people put in jail that shouldn't be in jail. So there's just a lot of mistrust, and we have to find ways to build it back. I mean, there is something to, you know, community policing, and police being seen as the good guy, not the guy to be afraid of.
Yeah, it's disturbing to read how many suicides there have been among the police departments. I think it's maybe at an all-time high, and I don't know if it's different in urban areas than in other areas, but what you referred to in terms of the police needing counseling as much as the community needing counseling and not expecting it is important.
And I actually have legislation to help with that, counseling for first responders, including another bill, including 911 operators, because I think that they hear the horror stories also.
So how does the federal government, how does Congress get involved in that issue? I mean, what would your bill do? Provide money, or just make it a mandate, or what?
No, not make it a mandate, waive some of the services that it would be resources, financial resources, because the way it sounds like it's set up now, that if like, for instance, my stepdaughter, that's a 911 operator, let's just say, if she wanted to go to counseling, she would have to ultimately pay for it. So we're trying to set up a way where either, insurance would totally cover, or there's some fee waiving that we could do. There's programs, and I think the way the program is that the police departments would still have to pay some money. So we're trying to see how we could waive that, and that counseling is just a benefit of the job.
And what is the Black Brain Trust that you first mentioned?
Oh, the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust.
Yeah.
It's the policy group for the Congressional Black Caucus around health. There's different brain trusts. And initially, when it was started by Lou Stokes, it was really to get more African Americans into the medical field. There's been many studies that talk about people do better when it's someone that looks like them and that they're listening to or being cared for by, or at least someone that understands the reality of the situation. So it was under Lou Stokes, and then Dr. Donna Christensen, and she had to do a lot around the ACA, and then she left Congress, so they asked me to take over. So we've been working on, health disparities, and we work with the Tri-Caucus, so the Asian American Pacific Islander Caucus and the Latino Caucus a lot. And then also, so healthcare disparities and diversifying the pipeline, the healthcare pipeline, not just doctors, but all kind of professions. And then we're doing work around telehealth.
So what would really be the end product of that kind of policy work that the brain trusts do?
Well, we'd like to see more Black doctors and nurses and psychologists, psychiatrists, people in even healthcare entrepreneurs, whatever, that would mean. But so that would be one thing. The other thing is that African Americans wouldn't be have died from 8 of the top 10 diseases that we die from, that we see, better health. We see access to health that people don't feel like they have now, where they live. Even like when you think about COVID, you hear a lot about vaccine hesitancy. Yes, there's some of that, but what we found that it's some hesitancy, but also it's lack of access, to get the shot. It's not just the hesitancy. So so it would look like that too, that we are healthier, that we live longer. There's a area in Chicago, if you go from the south side 7 miles to the north side, the life expectancy increases 30 years. There's something awfully wrong with that.
Yeah, I know that the Community Trust is focused, Helene Gale is focused on that, I think, quite a bit. So one last question, and that is, there's been a lot of discussion about how the whole pandemic has been handled, and the dispute, if you will, or the conflict between whether the federal government should have taken a more active role from the beginning, or whether the states were appropriately left to deal with it on their own. And I'm not talking about financially so much as in terms of policy. How did you feel about that?
I thought that the federal government should have done far more than we did. I don't think that our governors or our states should have been competing against each other, for the products. And I think that, we should have had more equipment in the stockpile. And I think that more information should have been given to not only our governors, but more information should have been given to us. Also, we were in the dark, somewhat also about what was going on. So, the federal government, or I will say the Republican administration, they should have acted a lot quicker. And I mean, President Trump even admits that he knew, but he, didn't act upon it. He didn't want to tell. He didn't want to scare the public. So no, we should have done more than we did. Now, I'm not going to excuse the governors completely, because, those that wouldn't close down the states, those that don't mandate masks, Texas had a baseball game where everyone could come, but I'm also not going to excuse everyday individuals that government can't do everything, that individuals need to be responsible too. Like when you look at spring break and all the, college students plus that were right on top of each other with no mask, so everyone has a part to play. Everyone has responsibility, but we should have done a lot more from the beginning.
Yeah. Is the mood in Washington very different now from 6 months ago?
It's different where, so I said to my husband, sometimes I forget that Biden and Harris are there because it's so quiet. They're just, methodically doing their jobs. But so in that way, there's more, of a relief, but also, people can't forget what happened January 6th. And I was one of the people on my hands and knees in the gallery hoping to get out alive, and then for, a police officer to die, 2 police officers committed suicide right after that. And now just, last week we lost another police officer, so security is questionable.
Yeah, I understand. I think it's time to let some of the other participants ask questions, and I think they're going to be read from the chat box. If
Okay.
I'm correct. So who's ever going to read them?
Yes, thank you both for your time. As I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, please submit them into the chat. Our first question is coming from Harriet Seymour. She says, you mentioned some good things that have come out of the pandemic. I think people and businesses have pivoted to survive in the pandemic. What things would you like to see remain in the new normal that have made things better?
Well, one thing, I'm sure, even though I know people say they're zoomed out, but also Zooms have made things more convenient in some ways, which is good. Like, people don't have to travel as much. And even me, I'm thinking what about my staff and how we're going to redo the office and how many people have to actually come into work every day. But also the other thing, I mentioned about telemedicine, and I see us working with that and seeing what we could do to keep telemedicine around, because again, I've spoken to doctors all over the United States, and they shared how patients have kept their appointments, how, and I've talked to patients that don't have to worry about transportation or childcare and things like that. So I see that staying in place also, but I'd see businesses changing how they do business somewhat because of Zoom.
So do you, how are you going to allocate your time between your Washington, D.C. responsibilities, the state of Illinois Democratic Party responsibilities, and your personal life?
That remains to be seen. I mean, I'm doing it right now. I do things at night, on the weekend, when I'm asked to, like, we just had municipal elections. So on the weekend when I came home, I traveled to different places. But also the other thing is we've changed how we do things in DC, that I have been home. This is the end of the 3rd week. So we're doing things a little bit differently because of COVID, but also because there are more parents that are members of Congress, and they find it easier to go to DC for a chunk of time and then be home for a chunk of time. So we're kind of doing things a little bit different. So that gives me more time to be at home. And again, because of Zoom, it makes it easier to, hold meetings with whomever, so that's made things a little easier, even though I still say we need Zoom etiquette, because, you can be on Zoom all night and you don't want to do that either.
Definitely, definitely. Kristen, is there another question?
There are no more questions in the chat at this time.
Okay. So what do you see as the big challenges in the next 6 months for you personally?
Oh, for me
Or
personally?
Or professionally?
Yeah. Well, we're going through, the Democratic Party of Illinois is going through a transition right now. I put together a transition team. In fact, we're meeting tomorrow night with all the recommendations, and then I'll meet with the whole of the state central committee. So just laying out our course, as we go forward, what we're going to do, what we want to see differently. And then the elections coming up will be, the big challenge, whether on the state side or federally. Federally, we're hanging by the hair of our chinny chin chin, even though we're Democrat, but barely. And even right now in the House, we have 4 seats that aren't filled because 3 went to the Biden administration. And we just lost my dear colleague, Elsie Hastings, yesterday to pancreatic cancer. So, that makes it tough in wanting to pass, legislation. So, we need to get more Democrats on board. And then, we can't take anything for granted. Even then, we're the blue state, but you still can't take anything for granted in the state of Illinois. And then the other thing is, we have the redistricting we have to deal with, even though that's, the state reps and state senators, but that's still going to be a challenge since, the census is late. And we know we're going to lose at least 1 congressional seat, which we've done every decade for about 5 or 6 decades now.
Yeah. I think I saw a question about childcare from Liza Eintema, and that reminds me of Janet Yellen's talk just a couple days ago on the Chicago Council platform, where she was asked a question about how do you get to gender parity globally as well as nationally, and the answer was until there is appropriate childcare and family leave, you're not going to see gender parity. Is there an interest in Congress to pursue something like that agenda?
There's definitely an interest, but frankly, we don't have the votes. I mean, I took part in a hearing, I think it was oversight, about the gender pay gap, and there were women congresspeople that were defending the status quo. It's just very tough to get things passed. It's unbelievable. But when we talked about the stats and things like that, they had, witnesses, and the female members of Congress, they pushed back. So we definitely talk about it. I mean, we had 172 people vote against the Violence Against Women Act. 172 people voted against that.
On what basis? What is their rationale?
I really couldn't tell you.
Okay.
Because I don't understand. I remember I went to one of them about the whole gun safety. I said, I'm not against guns, but what is going on is absolutely ridiculous. And I went to Rep. Steve Scalise, who had been shot. And he said to me, you Democrats are so reactive. He said, I'm not against silencers. And that's how the police officers knew, because they could hear the bullets. And he said he wasn't against bump stocks, what had been used in Las Vegas. He said, I'm not against those either. So I just, threw up my hands because, I don't know, I can't explain. And I don't put one broad brush on any group or anything like that. Some of the most conservative Republicans I have a good relationship with. Mark Meadows loved me, who went to work for President Trump. I used to bring him Garrett's popcorn from Illinois. They said I have popcorn diplomacy because I brought Dems and Republicans popcorn, but I don't understand, where they're coming from.
Is there any question I should have asked you that I didn't ask you? What?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I'm trying to think. You asked me a lot of questions.
I did ask you a lot of questions.
I have a grandson.
Well, thank you for your openness and your availability and your
Thank you.
enthusiasm. And we're lucky to have you represent us in Washington.
Thank you.
And we look forward to the things that you're going to achieve as chair of the Democratic Party of Illinois. And I hope that we continue to see you on the public forum. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time. I do want to say I do love my job. So when you ask me about the balance and all of that, when you love what you do, that makes it easier. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.